Deep beneath the mist-shrouded fjords, where stone whispers and darkness holds ancient secrets, a blind scout's trembling fingers trace glowing runes that pulse with forgotten power. Bjorn Soundwalker, the most revered listener of the Northclans, has never seen the world, yet now the gods themselves have torn away the veil of darkness. His unseeing eyes burn with a vision of Midgardr's destruction, a serpent rising from the depths, ready to devour the known world. Can one blind man's prophecy save a people who refuse to listen? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind carried memories like whispers through the narrow valleys of the Northclans territory. Generations of warriors had walked these paths, their footsteps etched into the very stone, but none quite like Bjorn Soundwalker. His blindness was not a weakness, but a gateway to a world most could never comprehend. From the moment of his birth, marked by an eclipse that darkened the skies above his mother's birthing tent, Bjorn was different, the village elder, Grimwald. The wise had placed a weathered hand on the infant's head and spoken words that would echo through Bjorn's entire life. "The gods have taken his eyes," Grimwald had murmured, "but they will gift him with a vision far beyond what others can see." His mother, Sigrid, a woman whose strength was legendary among the Northclans, refused to let her son be defined by his lack of sight. Where other children might have been cast aside or hidden, Bjorn was brought into the heart of the clans daily, a life. She would guide his hands through intricate tasks, weaving fishing nets, carving bone tools, preparing hides for winter clothing. Each touch was a lesson, each movement a story waiting to be understood. As a young boy, Bjorn learned to navigate the world through sound, not just the sounds that others heard, but the subtle vibrations that most ignored. The whisper of grass bending before a distant storm, the nearly imperceptible shift of rock. Beneath a traveler's foot, the distant heartbeat of a wounded animal miles away. His hearing became so acute that the clan's hunters would often seek his guidance, marveling at his ability to predict game movements and detect approaching dangers. The bone whistle hung around his neck was more than a simple artifact, carved from the femur of his grandfather, a legendary scout who had saved the clan from a devastating raid generations ago. It was a connection to his ancestors. When the wind passed through its carefully crafted holes, it seemed to sing with voices from beyond, telling stories of battles long past and prophecies yet unfulfilled. Bjorn's training as a scout was unconventional, while other young men learned to fight with axe and sword. He learned to read the world through touch and sound. The clan's rune masters would place ancient stones in his hands, guiding his fingers across their surfaces. Each stone told a story, some of great battles, others of migrations, some of prophecies that had shaped the very existence of the Northclans. "The runes speak," his mentor would say, "but only to those who know how to listen." And listen he did. Bjorn discovered that the runes were more than mere markings. They were living histories, breathing with the memories of generations. Where others saw simple etchings, he felt entire sagas pulse beneath his fingertips. The elders began to watch him with a mixture of reverence and unease. A blind boy who could read stones and hear whispers from the spirit world was both a blessing and a potential threat. His blindness had become his greatest strength. While other scouts relied on their eyes, Bjorn navigated the treacherous fjord landscapes using a complex symphony of sound, touch, and an inexplicable connection to the spiritual world. He could detect the approach of a trading ship hours before it became visible, sense the subtle changes in terrain that might indicate a hidden pass, and read the emotional state of a person through the rhythm of their breath. But with this gift came isolation. The other young warriors viewed him with a combination of respect and suspicion. He was different, not just blind, but something more, a conduit between the physical world and whatever lay beyond. Little did anyone know that Bjorn's unique abilities were preparing him for a prophecy that would test the very survival of the Northclans, a vision so profound, so terrifying, that it would challenge everything they believed about their world and their gods. The bone whistle around his neck seemed to tremble, as if sensing the coming storm. The driftwood lay across Bjorn's open palms, a silent messenger from the depths. Its surface was unlike any piece of wood he had ever touched, smooth in some places, rough with intricate markings in others. The tide-marked driftwood carried whispers of something far more sinister than a simple piece of flotsam. Bjorn's fingers traced the lines etched by salt water and time. Each groove told a story, and today those stories spoke of impending doom. The marks were not random. They were a map, a warning carved by the very sea itself. His unseeing eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that belied his blindness, a fire kindled by something beyond mortal understanding. "The serpent rises," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The clan gathering hall fell silent. Jarls and elder warriors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Bjorn Soundwalker had always been different, but this was something else entirely. His reputation as a skilled scout and spiritual interpreter had earned him respect, but this proclamation pushed the boundaries of credibility. Ragnar Stormheart, the most senior of the clan leaders, leaned forward. His weathered face, marked by countless battles, showed a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Explain yourself, Bjorn," he demanded, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the wooden hall. Bjorn's hands moved across the driftwood, fingers mapping out the intricate patterns. "These marks are not natural," he said. "They speak of Midgardr, the world serpent. Its rise is no longer a myth. It is a coming reality." He began to describe the vision that had come to him. The sea changing color, not to the usual grays and blues, but to a sickly phosphorescent green. Waves that moved not with the rhythm of wind and tide, but with a purposeful, malevolent intelligence. And beneath those waves, something massive, stirring, a presence so ancient and terrible that it made the concept of destruction seem almost trivial. "The gods have shown me," Bjorn continued, his voice gaining strength. "Midgardr is awakening. The serpent that encircles the world, the one prophesied to bring about Ragnarok, is preparing to break its bonds." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the gathering. Some warriors laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that cut through the smoky air of the hall. Others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to dismiss Bjorn's words or take them seriously. Ragnar's daughter Astrid, a warrior in her own right, spoke up. "And how exactly did the gods deliver this message?" Her tone was sharp, challenging. Bjorn turned his head slightly, though his blank eyes did not focus on anything. "Through the runes, through the very fabric of the world itself. The signs are everywhere, if one knows how to listen, how to feel." He held up the driftwood, and even the most skeptical could not deny the strange markings that covered its surface. They were not random scratches, but deliberate etchings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "The sea is changing," Bjorn said. "The currents speak of a coming storm unlike anything we have ever witnessed. Midgardr is not just a myth, it is a threat that will consume everything, our lands, our people, our very existence." Old Grimwald, the clan's spiritual leader, studied Bjorn carefully. Unlike the others, he did not dismiss the young scout's words. There was something in Bjorn's demeanor, a certainty, a connection to forces beyond normal perception that demanded attention. "Show me the wood," Grimwald said, his voice calm but laden with weight. As Bjorn passed the driftwood to the elder, a sudden gust of wind extinguished several torches in the hall. For a moment, an unnatural silence descended, as if the very air was holding its breath. The seeds of warning had been planted. Whether the Northclans would heed them remained to be seen. The storm-charting runestone map spread across the rough-hewn table, its surface alive with intricate markings that seemed to shift and breathe. Bjorn's fingers traced the carefully etched lines, each touch revealing patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. Around him, a small group of potential allies listened intently, not out of complete belief, but out of a growing sense of unease. The coastal territories were changing. Fishermen spoke of strange currents, of waters that moved with an intelligence never before witnessed. Migratory birds flew in patterns that defied generations of navigational wisdom. The very earth seemed to be whispering a warning that most chose to ignore. "Look here," Bjorn said, guiding the hands of Halvar, a seasoned navigator from the northern fjords. "The storm patterns are not random. They're converging, moving with a purpose." Halvar's calloused hands followed Bjorn's guidance. Despite his initial skepticism, the old sailor could not deny the precision of the markings. The runestone map was unlike any chart he had ever seen. The lines seemed to pulse with an energy that spoke of something far beyond natural meteorological patterns. "These are not just storm tracks," Halvar muttered. "These are something else entirely." Bjorn nodded. Each clan territory presented its own challenges. The Northclans were not a unified people, but a collection of independent groups bound by loose alliances and ancient traditions. Convincing them of a collective threat would be his greatest challenge. To the east, the Fjordholm clan remained skeptical. Their leader, Bjorn Ironfist, was a pragmatic man who trusted only what he could see and touch. To the west, the sea. Raven's clan was more spiritually inclined, but equally difficult to persuade. They had their own prophecies, their own understanding of the world's mysteries. His journey was not just about warning, it was about understanding. Each interaction, each conversation peeled back another layer of the impending catastrophe. The runestone map was more than a navigation tool. It was a living document of the world's changing nature. "The serpent moves beneath the waters," Bjorn would explain to those willing to listen, "not as a physical creature, but as a force, a living, breathing manifestation of destruction." Some laughed, others grew silent, a chill running down their spines. In the village of the Stormbreak clan, an old woman named Sigrid, not his mother, but another keeper of ancient wisdom, approached him after one of his presentations. Her hands, gnarled like driftwood, touched his face with surprising gentleness. "You see with more than eyes," she whispered. "The old ways remember. The gods do not speak lightly." Her words carried the weight of generations. The oral histories of the Norse people were filled with prophecies, with warnings passed down through centuries. Bjorn was not just a messenger, he was a conduit for something far greater. The runestone map continued to change. Lines would appear and disappear. Storm tracks would shift with a fluidity that defied natural law. It was as if the very fabric of their world was preparing for something monumental. Halvar watched Bjorn work, fascination replacing his initial doubt. "How do you know?" he asked finally. "How can you be certain?" Bjorn's unseeing eyes seemed to look beyond the physical world. "I do not know," he responded. "I feel. The runes speak. The earth trembles, the sea whispers." Each clan presented a different challenge. The Fjordholm were pragmatic, demanding physical evidence. The sea ravens sought spiritual confirmation. The mountain wolves were concerned only with their own survival. Uniting them would require more than words. It would require proof. And time was running short. The runestone map continued to change, its lines becoming more urgent, more insistent. Something was coming, something that would challenge everything they knew about their world, their gods, their very existence. Bjorn touched the map once more. The lines seemed to burn beneath his fingers, a warning etched in stone and mystical energy. The serpent was rising, and few were prepared to listen. The binding cord of clan oaths hung heavy around Bjorn's neck, a braided testament to the fragile alliances he was attempting to forge. Each knot represented a promise, a potential connection between clans that had spent generations viewing each other with suspicion and occasional outright hostility. His journey took him through terrain that would challenge even the most seasoned traveler. The landscape seemed to shift beneath his feet, responding to something beyond human perception. Bjorn's blindness was both a curse and a blessing. Where others saw obstacles, he felt pathways. Where others heard silence, he listened to the earth's subtle conversations. The mountain wolf clan's territory was particularly treacherous. Their chieftain, Ulf Stoneheart, was known for his brutal pragmatism and deep-seated distrust of outsiders. Bjorn knew that winning his support would be crucial and nearly impossible. "Another wandering prophet," Ulf muttered when Bjorn was brought before him in the clan's massive stone hall. The walls were adorned with pelts and trophies from countless battles, each a testament to the clan's martial prowess. Bjorn stood tall, his unseeing eyes focused with an intensity that unnerved even the most hardened warriors. "I come with a warning," he said, "not a prophecy to be dismissed." He began to speak of the signs, the changing sea currents, the unusual migrations of birds and fish, the subtle shifts in the earth's very fabric. Each word was carefully chosen, backed by the intricate knowledge he had gathered from clan to clan. Ulf interrupted, his voice a low growl. "We are warriors, not mystics. Our strength is in our axes, not in whispered warnings." But something in Bjorn's demeanor gave the chieftain pause. The young scout produced the binding cord, its intricate knots telling a story of potential unity. Each clan represented a thread, separate yet capable of being woven into something stronger. "The threat comes for all of us," Bjorn said. "Not just the coastal clans, not just the seafarers. Every piece of land, every group of people will feel the serpent's approach." As if to punctuate his words, a distant rumble echoed through the mountain halls. Several warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Even the most skeptical could not ignore the growing sense of unease. Bjorn's journey was more than a physical trek. It was a spiritual pilgrimage, a mission to unite people who had spent generations finding reasons to remain apart. Each clan had its own traditions, its own understanding of the world. Convincing them of a collective threat was like trying to weave water into stone. The Sea Raven clan proved slightly more receptive. Their spiritual leader, an elderly woman named Freya, recognized something in Bjorn that others missed. When he placed the binding cord in her hands, she traced its knots with a knowing touch. "The old spirits are restless," she murmured. "Something approaches that is beyond our understanding." But recognition was not the same as action. Each clan had its own concerns, its own immediate struggles. The threat of Midgardr seemed abstract, a distant possibility compared to the very real challenges of survival. Nights were the most challenging. Around campfires, Bjorn would share stories, not just of the impending doom, but of the potential for survival. He spoke of unity, of collective strength. Some listened, many did not. The binding cord became more than a physical artifact. It was a symbol of potential, a thread that could connect disparate groups, a lifeline in the face of an incomprehensible threat. As he traveled, Bjorn collected more than just potential allies. He gathered evidence, strange stones with markings that seemed to shift, fragments of driftwood etched with cryptic messages, whispers from those who had seen things that defied explanation. Doubt was his constant companion. With each clan that dismissed him, with each leader who turned away, Bjorn felt the weight of his mission more acutely. Was he truly seeing the future, or was he simply a blind man chasing shadows? But then would come a moment, a sudden shift in the wind, a distant cry that seemed to echo from beyond the physical world that would reaffirm his conviction. The serpent was rising, and time was running out. The whispering shell rested in Bjorn's palm, delicate artifact that seemed to pulse with memories older than the mountains themselves. He had discovered it in a remote cave, tucked away in a region where few dared to travel, a place where the boundary between the physical world and the realm of spirits seemed to blur. An ancient seer lived here, a woman so old that some whispered she had been born before the first stars were kindled. They called her Völva, the seeress of the forgotten paths. Her dwelling was unlike any place Bjorn had encountered. Carved directly into the living rock of a mountain, the cave was a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Bones hung from the ceiling, not in a threatening manner, but as careful arrangements that spoke of deep spiritual significance. Dried herbs, mysterious powders, and artifacts from countless generations surrounded him. "I have been expecting you," the Völva said, her voice a sound that seemed to emerge from the very stones around them. The blind scout who sees more than those with eyes. Bjorn felt rather than saw her approach. Her movements were not those of an elderly woman, but something more fluid, more ancient. The whispering shell in his hand began to hum, its surface etched with memories that predated human civilization. "Midgardr stirs," the seeress continued, "and few understand the true nature of what approaches." She guided Bjorn's hands to a collection of stones, each one different, each one holding a fragment of a story far more complex than the simple prophecy of destruction he had been pursuing. These were not just stones, they were memories, living, histories that spoke of cycles far beyond human comprehension. "The serpent is more than a creature of destruction," the Völva explained. "It is a force of balance, of renewal. The world does not end, it transforms." Bjorn listened, his fingers tracing the intricate markings on the stones. Each touch revealed layers of meaning, migrations of entire peoples, the rise and fall of civilizations, cosmic events that made human conflicts seem like mere ripples in an infinite ocean. The whispering shell began to speak, not in words, but in sensations. Bjorn saw glimpses of worlds before this one, civilizations that had risen and fallen, cosmic events that reshaped entire continents. Midgardr was not just a destructive force, but a mechanism of cosmic renewal. "Your people understand destruction," the Völva said, "but they do not understand transformation." She spoke of previous cycles, times when the world had been reshaped, when entire peoples had been forced to adapt or perish. The serpent was not an enemy to be fought, but a force to be understood. A cosmic reset button that cleared the way for new beginnings. "But the cost," Bjorn whispered, "will be immense." The seeress laughed, a sound that was both terrible and beautiful. "All birth requires sacrifice. All renewal demands destruction." The whispering shell continued its song. Bjorn saw visions of potential futures, some of complete annihilation, others of remarkable transformation. The threads of possibility were intricate, interconnected in ways that defied simple understanding. "The clans must unite," the Völva said, "not just as a defensive measure, but as a way of ensuring their own evolution. Those who cannot adapt will be swept away." Her words carried a weight that went beyond mere prophecy. This was a fundamental truth about existence itself. Change was not just inevitable, but necessary. Bjorn understood now that his mission was more than a warning. It was an invitation, an opportunity for his people to choose their path of transformation. The whispering shell grew quiet, but the memories it had shared would forever change how. Bjorn understood the approaching catastrophe. Midgardr was coming, and with it, a chance for everything to begin anew. The broken clan totem stood as a stark metaphor for their fractured unity. Splintered wood, carved with generations of tribal symbols, lay scattered across the council ground, a physical representation of the deep divisions that threatened to consume the Northclans before Midgardr could even approach. Bjorn watched, or rather felt, the tension that crackled through the gathering like lightning before a storm. Clan leaders from across the territories had assembled, not out of mutual respect, but out of a growing sense of unease that even the most stubborn could no longer ignore. Ragnar Stormheart of the coastal clans spoke first, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We will not commit our warriors to a phantom threat," he declared, his hand resting on the axe at his belt, a gesture more of warning than decoration. Ulf Stoneheart of the Mountain Wolves growled in agreement. "Pretty words and mystical warnings do not defend our borders. We have real enemies, ones we can see and fight." The political landscape was as treacherous as the most storm-tossed. "Fjord," Centuries of territorial disputes, blood feuds, and competing interests had created a web of alliances and enmities so complex that the mere suggestion of unified action seemed impossible. Bjorn stood at the center of the gathering, the broken totem beneath his feet. Each fragment told a story of battles fought, of promises broken, of pride that ran deeper than blood. "The threat is real," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the immediate protests. "I have seen it, felt it. The very earth is preparing for something beyond our comprehension." Astrid, daughter of Ragnar and a respected warrior in her own right, stepped forward. She was one of the few who had begun to take Bjorn's warnings seriously. "We have reports," she said, producing a collection of strange artifacts, pieces of driftwood with unusual markings, stones that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The mountain wolf's spiritual advisor, an old man named Gunnar, examined the artifacts carefully. His fingers, gnarled like ancient tree roots, traced the strange markings with a growing sense of unease. "These are not normal," Gunnar muttered. "These speak of something older." Political alliances began to shift like tectonic plates. The Raven clan, traditionally more spiritually inclined, saw an opportunity. Their leader, a cunning strategist named Eric Wavebringer, recognized that unity might be their only chance of survival. "If what the blind scout says is true," Eric proposed, "we must consider a unified response." But unity did not come easily. Each clan had its own interests, its own interpretation of the growing threats. The Fjord clan worried about their fishing grounds. The mountain wolves concerned themselves with potential invasions. The coastal clans feared disruptions to their trading routes. Bjorn understood that the greatest threat was not Midgardr, but the clan's inability to see beyond their immediate concerns. "The serpent does not care about your borders," he said quietly. "It does not respect your territories. It will consume everything." A heated argument erupted. Accusations flew. Old blood feuds resurfaced. The broken totem seemed to mock their attempts at unity, a physical reminder of how easily they could be divided. Ragnar Stormheart approached Bjorn, his massive frame casting a shadow. "Prove it," he challenged. "Show us something concrete." But prophecy was not something that could be proven with simple evidence. It required faith, understanding, a willingness to look beyond the immediate and see the larger pattern. As the argument continued, Bjorn felt something shift. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, ever so slightly. A warning, a reminder that their petty conflicts meant nothing in the face of what was coming. The broken totem remained at his feet, a symbol of their current state, fragmented, divided, vulnerable. And time was running out. The salt-encrusted prophecy scroll lay unrolled, its edges brittle with age, its surface telling a story that few had dared to read in full. Bjorn's fingers traced the ancient markings, feeling the weight of generations compressed into fragile parchment. Something was changing in the world. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual shift that most would barely notice until it was too late. The first signs appeared in the smallest of ways. Fishermen spoke of strange currents that defied generations of navigational wisdom. Nets came up empty, or filled with creatures never before seen in these waters. The sea itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. In the coastal villages, wells began to produce water with an unusual taste, slightly metallic, with a hint of something ancient and undefined. Crops near the shoreline withered unexpectedly, their roots seemingly poisoned by something beneath the soil. Bjorn traveled from settlement to settlement, collecting these fragments of change. Each report was a piece of a larger puzzle, a mosaic of destruction slowly taking shape. An old fisherman in the Sea Raven territory showed him a catch that defied explanation. Strange fish with translucent skin and eyes that seemed to hold memories of something far older than the ocean itself. Their bodies pulsed with an unnatural light, as if they were carrying something more than mere biological existence. "I've never seen anything like this," the fisherman muttered, his hands trembling slightly. But Bjorn knew these were not just anomalies, they were harbingers. The migration patterns of birds had become increasingly erratic. Flocks would suddenly change direction mid-flight, as if responding to a call that no human could hear. Whales were seen in waters they had never inhabited, their songs changing to something more primordial. In the mountain villages, shepherds reported strange occurrences. Livestock would suddenly become agitated for no apparent reason. Sheep would huddle together, facing away from the sea, their eyes wide with an almost human-like fear. The prophecy scroll told of such signs, warnings written centuries ago that spoke of a time when the boundaries between worlds would begin to blur. Bjorn collected everything, every strange report, every unusual occurrence. The salt-encrusted scroll became a living document, its margins filled with new observations, new evidence of the approaching transformation. Some clan leaders began to listen, not out of complete belief, but out of a growing sense of unease. The changes were becoming too frequent, too widespread to ignore. Eric Wavebringer of the Sea Raven clan brought Bjorn a piece of driftwood, unlike any he had ever encountered. Its surface was etched with markings that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Patterns that suggested something was growing beneath the surface of reality itself. "Tell me what you see," Eric challenged. Bjorn's fingers traced the wood. What he felt was more than mere physical sensation. It was a story, a warning, a promise of something vast and incomprehensible approaching. "The serpent is not just coming," Bjorn said quietly. "It is already here, changing everything, preparing." Coastal communities began to report strange fogbanks, thick, unnatural mists that seemed to swallow sound and light. Fishermen who ventured into these banks would return changed, speaking of visions that made no sense, of sounds that existed beyond human hearing. The salt-encrusted scroll seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. The prophecy was no longer just words on ancient parchment. It was becoming reality. Midgardr was not just approaching, it was awakening. And the world was beginning to feel its first tremors. The blood-bound alliance hammer gleamed in the firelight, its surface etched with the marks of countless tribal promises. Bjorn stood before a gathering of warriors from different clans, a sight that would have been impossible mere months ago. The threat of Midgardr had done what generations of diplomacy could not. It had begun to unite the Northclans. Astrid Stormheart was the first to truly understand. Daughter of Ragnar, she had seen the strange signs, the shifting seas, the unusual migrations, the way the very air seemed to hold its breath. Where her father saw only skepticism, she saw opportunity, a chance to forge something greater than their individual clan identities. "We are not just fighting for our individual territories," she addressed the gathered warriors. "We are fighting for our entire existence." The alliance was fragile. Warriors from the mountain wolves stood shoulder to shoulder with coastal fishermen. Sea Raven clan archers positioned themselves next to fjord clan axe-wielders. Each group brought their unique skills, their ancestral knowledge. Bjorn moved among them, not as a leader in the traditional sense, but as a conduit. His blindness became a strength. He saw beyond the physical, beyond the immediate threats. He could feel the potential of this united force. Eric Wavebringer, the Sea Raven clan leader, had been instrumental in bringing these disparate groups together. His diplomatic skills, combined with the growing evidence of the approaching threat, had slowly worn down the resistance of the more stubborn clan leaders. Training became intense, but this was not just about martial prowess. Bjorn introduced techniques that went beyond traditional warfare, listening exercises, meditation practices that expanded awareness, ways of sensing the world that went beyond simple physical perception. "The enemy we face," Bjorn would explain, "is not something you can fight with axes alone." The blood-bound alliance hammer was more than a symbolic tool. During a powerful ceremony, representatives from each clan struck the hammer, mixing their blood, a literal and metaphorical binding of their fates. Each strike rang out like a challenge to the coming doom. Gunnar, the mountain wolf's spiritual advisor, began to teach the warriors about the deeper mythological context. stories of previous world endings, cycles of destruction and renewal. The warriors listened with a mixture of fear and fascination. Practical preparations were equally important. Scouts were trained in new methods of detection. Lookouts learned to read the most subtle changes in environment. Hunters developed techniques to track movements that were not quite physical. Astrid worked closely with Bjorn, becoming his primary interpreter and strategist. Where he sensed, she translated. Where he perceived, she planned. The serpent is not just a physical threat, Bjorn would tell them. It is a force of transformation. Our goal is not just survival, but understanding. Some warriors struggled with this concept. They were trained to fight, to destroy. The idea of transformation was foreign to them. But as the strange occurrences increased, the bizarre sea creatures, the unnatural fog banks, the inexplicable changes in wildlife, more began to understand. The alliance was not just military, it was spiritual, a collective awakening. Old feuds were set aside. Territorial disputes became meaningless in the face of what was coming. The blood-bound alliance hammer stood as a testament to their new unity, a promise forged in blood and necessity. As night fell, the gathered warriors listened to Bjorn, not as a prophet but as a guide, someone who could help them navigate the incomprehensible changes approaching. Midgardr was coming, and for the first time, the Northclans would face it. Together, the serpent-scale shield caught the first light of dawn, its surface a patchwork of iridescent scales that seemed to breathe with an unnatural life of their own. Bjorn's fingers traced the edges, feeling the impossible texture, part organic, part something entirely beyond human comprehension. The first true encounter came without warning. It began with a sound, not a roar, not a crash, but a low, resonant that seemed to emerge from the very foundations of the world. Warriors who had been standing watch felt it first, a vibration that started in their bones and spread outward, a frequency that defied natural law. The sea changed first. What had been gradual transformations became sudden, violent shifts. Waves began to move with an intelligence that no natural current could explain. They rose not in the typical patterns of wind and tide, but with a deliberate, almost sentient motion. Astrid was the first to spot the initial manifestation. What appeared to be a distant fog bank began to take shape, not as mist, but as something more solid, something that moved with purpose. "It's alive," she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. The supernatural threat revealed itself in layers. First, the water itself seemed to change. Colors shifted, not gradually, but in sudden, impossible transitions. Greens that no ocean had ever produced, blues that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Bjorn felt it more acutely than anyone. His lack of physical sight became an advantage. Where others saw, he perceived. Where others heard, he understood. "Midgardr is not coming," he said quietly. "Midgardr is here." The first wave of creatures defied description. They were not simply sea monsters or mythical beasts. They were something else entirely, living manifestations of the boundary between what was and what could be, shapes that shifted between solid and liquid, between animal and something far more ancient. Fishing boats that had gone out early were the first to encounter the full force of the transformation. Those that returned spoke of impossible things, creatures that were part wave, part living entity, surfaces that breathed, sounds that carried memories. The serpent-scale shield became more than a defensive weapon. It was a record of the encounter, each scale telling a story of the first true manifestation of Midgardr's approach. Eric Wavebringer organized the initial defensive response. But this was not a battle that could be fought with traditional weapons. The threat was not something that could be cut, stabbed, or destroyed through conventional means. "We are not fighting an enemy," Bjorn explained to the gathered warriors. "We are witnessing a transformation." Some warriors broke. The human mind can only comprehend so much before it begins to fracture. Those who had been the most skeptical were often the first to lose their composure. Hardened warriors wept. Seasoned scouts babbled about things that should not exist. But others, Those who had listened to Bjorn, those who had begun to understand, stood firm. The first true assault came with a wave that was not a wave. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. It carried with it creatures that were part memory, part physical manifestation. Beings that spoke without sound, that moved between states of existence. Astrid fought alongside the warriors, her tactical mind working overtime. We cannot defeat this, she realized. We can only survive it. Bjorn's unseeing eyes seemed to see everything. He understood now what the Völva had told him. This was not destruction, this was renewal. The serpent-scaled shield began to change. Its scales moved, rearranged, becoming something new, something that was neither weapon nor artifact, but a living record of the transformation. Midgardr had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The blinding sight runestone hung suspended in the air, defying every natural law. Its surface pulsed with an inner light that seemed to breathe, not with the rhythm of a living creature, but with something far more ancient and profound. Bjorn stood at the center of a sacred circle, surrounded by the most spiritually attuned, members of the United Clans. This was no ordinary ritual. This was a transformation that would either save them or destroy everything they understood about existence. Grimwald, the eldest spiritual advisor, approached with careful steps. His hands trembled not with age, but with the weight of what was about to occur. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice a whisper that seemed to echo beyond the physical space they occupied. Bjorn's response was not in words, but in a sense of absolute certainty that radiated from his very being. His blindness had always been more of a gift than a limitation. Now it would become something entirely different. The ritual began with silence. Not the absence of sound, but a presence so complete that it seemed to fill every possible space of perception. The blinding sight runestone began to rotate, slowly at first, then with increasing speed and intensity. Astrid watched from the periphery, her warrior's mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She had seen battles, had witnessed impossible things in the encounters with Midgardr's manifestations, but this was something else entirely. Chants began, not in any language currently spoken, but in sounds that predated human communication, words that were more feeling than sound, more intention than language. The spiritual advisors from different clans, who had once been bitter enemies, now stood united, their voices intertwining in a complex harmony. The runestone's light began to change. It was no longer simply light, but a living substance that seemed to flow between states of matter, liquid one moment, solid the next, then something that defied description. Bjorn's body began to change. Not physically, at least not in ways that could be easily observed, but something was shifting. His perception was expanding, breaking through the limitations of human understanding. "The gods are not external," he spoke, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "They are a state of perception, a way of understanding." The spiritual advisors continued their chant. Gunnar from the mountain wolves felt something breaking within himself, old barriers of understanding, rigid beliefs that had limited their perception of the world. The blinding sight runestone began to merge with Bjorn, not physically, but in a way that transcended physical boundaries. It was as if his consciousness was expanding, taking in layers of reality that had always existed but were never perceived. Memories flooded through him, not just his own, but memories of the land, of the clans, of the very earth itself. He could feel the movement of water beneath the ground, the slow breath of mountains, the intricate network of life that connected everything. Midgardr was not an external threat. It was a process of transformation, a cosmic reset that would reshape everything. Astrid watched in awe as Bjorn's unseeing eyes began to glow, not with light, but with a depth of perception that seemed to look through reality itself. He was becoming something more than human, a conduit, a bridge between what was and what could be. The ritual reached its crescendo. The blinding sight runestone dissolved, becoming part of Bjorn's very essence. The spiritual advisors fell silent, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were witnessing. When it was over, Bjorn was changed, not different in appearance, but different in every way that truly mattered. He could now see, not with eyes, but with a perception that went far beyond physical sight. "We are not preparing for a battle," he said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "We are midwives to a new world." The transformation was complete, and nothing would ever be the same again. The poison-etched dagger of treachery lay on the council table, its blade reflecting the firelight with an almost malevolent gleam. Each intricate etching told a story of betrayal, a map of political intrigue that threatened to unravel everything they had built. Bjorn's transformed perception caught the subtle shifts of intention long before they manifested. The threat was no longer just Midgardr. The greatest danger now came from within their own ranks. Ragnar Stormheart's son, Eirik, had been working in the shadows. A young man consumed by ambition, he saw the approaching catastrophe not as a collective challenge, but as an opportunity for personal advancement. His network of informants and manipulators had been quietly undermining the unified effort. "The blind prophet has led us to ruin," Eirik whispered to key clan leaders. "While Bjorn speaks of transformation, our people face annihilation." Astrid discovered the first threads of the conspiracy. Her years of tactical training had honed an ability to read the subtle signs of political maneuvering. Conversations that ended too abruptly, messengers traveling unusual routes, clan leaders meeting in secret. The poison-etched dagger was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the complex web of loyalties and betrayals that threatened to tear apart their fragile alliance. Some clan leaders began to waver. The initial unity that had formed in the face of Midgardr's approach was fracturing. Fear does strange things to people. It makes them look for someone to blame, someone to sacrifice. Gunnar, the mountain wolf's spiritual advisor, brought crucial information to Bjorn. "There are those who believe they can negotiate with the coming destruction," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "They think they can find a way to preserve their own clan at the expense of others." Bjorn's new perception allowed him to see the intricate network of betrayal. It was not a simple matter of good versus evil. Each betrayal was rooted in fear, in a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control in the face of incomprehensible change. Eirik Wavebringer found himself caught in the middle. As one of the primary architects of their unified response, he was a prime target for those seeking to undermine their efforts. Whispers began to circulate, accusations of personal ambition, of using the threat of Midgardr to consolidate power. The poison-etched dagger became a focal point. It was discovered during a secret meeting of clan leaders who were plotting to break away from the unified response. Each mark on its blade represented a potential fracture point in their alliance. Eirik Stormheart had been particularly clever. He played on the deepest fears of each clan. To the mountain wolves, he suggested that the coastal clans would use this opportunity to expand their territories. To the sea ravens, he hinted at a conspiracy to redirect trade routes. Astrid confronted her brother directly. "You're tearing apart everything we've built," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. "I'm ensuring our survival." Eirik retorted, "Bjorn's mystical nonsense will be the death of us all." The betrayal ran deep. It was not just about political power, but about fundamentally different ways of understanding their world. Some saw Midgardr as a threat to be fought. Others, like Bjorn, saw it as a transformation to be understood. Bjorn's transformed perception allowed him to see the deeper truth. The betrayals were themselves part of a larger process. Fear, resistance, the desperate attempt to maintain the familiar in the face of fundamental change. "We are being tested," he told the council, "not by an external force, but by our own ability to adapt." The poison-etched dagger remained on the table, a constant reminder of the fragility of their unity. Each clan leader who looked at it saw something different, a weapon, a warning, a symbol of their deepest fears. Midgardr was coming, and their greatest challenge would not be the cosmic serpent, but their ability to face transformation together. The Stormcaller's horn hung silent, its surface etched with runes that seemed to pulse with an inner life. This was no ordinary instrument of war. It was a conduit between the physical world and something far more ancient. Midgardr's approach was not a single moment, but a cascading series of transformations that defied human understanding. The first true confrontation began not with a roar, but with a silence so complete it felt like a living presence. The sea changed first, not gradually, but in an instant that stretched into eternity. Waves that had followed natural laws for millennia suddenly became something else entirely. They moved with purpose, with intelligence. Each wave was a living entity, carrying memories older than humanity itself. Bjorn stood at the forefront, his transformed perception allowing him to see beyond the physical manifestation. Where others saw water and chaos, he perceived a complex narrative of cosmic renewal. Astrid coordinated the defensive formations. Years of tactical training met something beyond traditional warfare. The warriors were no longer just fighting, they were participating in a fundamental reshaping of reality. The Stormcaller's horn began to sound, not with a single note, but with a complex harmony that seemed to speak in a language older than words. It called to something beneath the surface, something that had been waiting. Creatures emerged from the transformed sea. They were not monsters in the traditional sense. Some were part water, part memory. Others were living embodiments of geological time, shapes that shifted between solid and liquid, between what was and what could be. Eric Wavebringer's ships formed the first line of defense, but defense was the wrong word. They were more like witnesses to a transformation that defied comprehension. The first wave hit with a force that was both physical and spiritual. Warriors who had prepared their entire lives found themselves facing something beyond combat. Some broke immediately, their minds unable to process the impossible nature of the confrontation. Bjorn's voice rang out, not with words, but with a perception that cut through the chaos. "We are not fighting," he called. "We are becoming." The Stormcaller's horn continued its song. Each note was a thread connecting the warriors to something larger. The boundary between individual and collective began to blur. Supernatural manifestations multiplied. Sea creatures that were part memory, part physical reality. Waves that carried entire histories. The very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling and reweaving itself simultaneously. Gunnar, the mountain wolf's spiritual advisor, realized they were witnessing something beyond destruction. This was a cosmic reset, a transformation so fundamental that human concepts of survival seemed almost irrelevant. Astrid fought with a precision that was both tactical and spiritual. Her movements were not just about defeating an enemy, but about participating in a larger process of change. The Stormcaller's horn reached a crescendo. Reality itself seemed to fold and unfold. Warriors found themselves experiencing memories that were not their own, geological time, ancestral experiences, cosmic movements. Eric Stormheart, who had previously worked to undermine their unity, found himself transformed by the experience. The petty political machinations seemed meaningless in the face of what was happening. Some warriors were absorbed into the living waves, not killed, but becoming part of something larger. Others found their perception expanding, breaking through the limitations of human consciousness. Bjorn stood at the center of the maelstrom. His transformed perception allowed him to see the larger pattern. Midgardr was not a destroyer. It was a process of cosmic renewal. "We are being reborn," he called out. His voice carried beyond sound, beyond physical perception. The Stormcaller's horn fell silent, but the transformation was just beginning. Reality would never be the same again. The memory-capturing crystal rested in Bjorn's hands, a delicate artifact that held within it the essence of those who had been. lost or transformed during the confrontation with Midgardr. Its surface shifted like liquid memory, capturing moments of profound sacrifice and incomprehensible change. Silence hung heavy in the aftermath. The landscape had been fundamentally altered, coastlines reshaped, territories redrawn by forces beyond human comprehension. What remained of the united clans gathered to understand their losses, to mourn, to comprehend. Astrid moved among the survivors, her warrior's heart weighted with grief and understanding. The crystal captured more than just individual memories. It held the collective experience of a people facing their most profound transformation. Eric Wavebringer had lost nearly half of his Sea Raven clan, but loss was no longer a simple concept. Some warriors had been absorbed into the living waves, others existed in a state between physical presence and something entirely new. They were not dead, but they were no longer entirely alive in the way they had been before. Gunnar, the mountain wolf's spiritual advisor, understood first. "Sacrifice is not an ending," he told the gathered survivors. "It is a transition." The memory-capturing crystal began to show fragments, moments of individual heroism, of profound connection, of humanity facing the incomprehensible. A young warrior who had held the line even as reality shifted around him, a group of fishermen who had become one with the transforming sea, their individual identities merging into something larger. Eric Stormheart, who had once sought to undermine their unity, sat quietly. His previous political machinations seemed meaningless now. He had lost his father in the confrontation, or perhaps his father had become something else entirely. "We are not who we were," Bjorn spoke, his transformed perception allowing him to see beyond the immediate sense of loss. "We are becoming something new." The crystal captured moments of extraordinary humanity, a warrior sharing his last water with an enemy, a group of survivors from different clans holding each other as reality transformed around them, moments of connection that transcended previous divisions. Astrid approached Bjorn, her hand touching the memory-capturing crystal. "How many did we lose?" she asked, knowing the answer would be complex. "We did not lose," Bjorn responded. "We transformed." Each survivor carried the weight of the encounter. Some spoke of experiencing memories that were not their own, geological time, ancestral experiences, cosmic movements. The boundary between individual and collective had become blurred. The memory-capturing crystal showed the true cost of their confrontation with Midgardr. It was not about numbers, not about physical loss. It was about a fundamental reshaping of existence. Gunnar began a ritual of remembrance. But this was not a traditional mourning. It was a celebration of transformation, of the incredible journey they had undertaken. Eric spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with understanding. "Everything we believed about ourselves, about our world, is gone." Eric Wavebringer nodded. The political boundaries, the clan divisions, the very concept of individual identity had been fundamentally challenged. The memory-capturing crystal continued to shift, showing moments of profound beauty amidst the destruction. A child's laughter, a moment of unexpected kindness, the resilience of human spirit in the face of incomprehensible change. Bjorn understood now what the Völva had told him. This was not an ending, this was a rebirth. "We are not survivors," he told them. "We are creators of a new world." The memory-capturing crystal pulsed with light, a beacon of hope, of transformation, of the incredible journey they had undertaken. They had faced Midgardr, and they had been changed forever. The strategy mapping runestone lay spread across a makeshift council ground, its surface a living document of their potential survival. Each mark, each line represented not just a tactical position, but a complex negotiation between what was and what could be. Bjorn's transformed perception saw beyond the physical map. Where others saw geographical boundaries, he perceived intricate networks of possibility, threads of potential futures weaving together in a complex tapestry of survival. The united clans were no longer what they had been. The previous confrontation with Midgardr had fundamentally changed them. Warriors who had survived the initial encounter were different, some physically altered, others carrying memories and perceptions that defied human understanding. Astrid coordinated the final preparations. Her tactical mind had evolved, incorporating the spiritual insights gained from their previous encounter. "We are not preparing for a battle," she explained to the gathered leaders. "We are preparing for a transformation." Each clan brought something unique. The mountain wolves contributed their deep understanding of endurance. The sea ravens brought their knowledge of adaptation. The coastal clans offered their resilience. What had once been sources of division now became their greatest strength. Eric Stormheart, who had once sought to undermine their unity, now worked tirelessly to support their collective effort. His previous ambitions seemed meaningless in the face of what they were about to face. The strategy mapping runestone began to change. Lines would appear and disappear. Potential paths would emerge and dissolve. It was more than a map. It was a living document of their potential futures. Gunnar, the spiritual advisor, worked alongside tactical leaders. The boundary between spiritual preparation and strategic planning had become meaningfully blurred. They were preparing not just with weapons and tactics, but with a deep understanding of the cosmic forces they were about to encounter. Eric Wavebringer brought reports from the transformed coastlines. The world was no longer what it had been. Territories had been reshaped. Geographical boundaries had become fluid. Their understanding of space itself was being challenged. "We cannot fight Midgardr," Bjorn explained. "We can only participate in its transformation." Preparations were unlike any military gathering. In history, warriors practiced not just combat techniques, but meditation practices. They learned to expand their perception, to understand the interconnectedness of all things. The strategy mapping runestone captured more than physical positions. It showed potential spiritual pathways, moments of connection, ways of understanding that went beyond traditional conflict. Weapons were prepared, but they were not traditional armaments. Each tool, each potential defensive mechanism was imbued with a deeper understanding. They were creating not just tools of survival, but conduits of transformation. Astrid worked on coordinating the final alignments, but coordination had become something more complex. It was about creating a collective consciousness, a unified approach to facing the incomprehensible. The clans that had once been bitter enemies now worked as a single organism. Political boundaries had dissolved. Clan identities had become fluid. They were becoming something new, something that could face the cosmic transformation approaching. Eric spoke with a wisdom that belied his previous political maneuverings. "We are no longer fighting for territory," he told the gathered leaders. "We are fighting for our ability to become." The strategy mapping runestone pulsed with an inner light. It was no longer just a map, but a living document of their potential survival. Bjorn stood at the center of this preparation. His transformed perception saw the larger pattern. They were not just preparing for a confrontation, they were participating in a cosmic rebirth. "We are ready," he said simply. The final preparations were complete. Midgardr was approaching, and nothing would ever be the same again. The serpent-binding chains lay forgotten, their intricate metalwork a testament to human limitation in the face of cosmic transformation. Midgardr's arrival was not a moment, but an unfolding, a process that defied every understanding of reality. The world began to breathe differently. Bjorn stood at the forefront, his transformed perception seeing beyond the physical manifestation. Where others would see destruction, he perceived a fundamental reshaping of existence itself. The serpent was not an external force. It was a living embodiment of cosmic renewal. The first signs were subtle. The sky changed color, not gradually, but in impossible shifts that seemed to fold and unfold, colors that had no name, that existed between perception and imagination. The very atmosphere became a living membrane, pulsing with an intelligence that went beyond human comprehension. Astrid watched as the landscape began to transform. Mountains seemed to breathe. Coastlines dissolved and reformed. The boundaries between sea, land, and sky became meaningless, fluid constructs that shifted with each collective breath. Warriors who had prepared their entire lives found themselves facing something beyond combat. Some minds fractured immediately, unable to process the impossible nature of the confrontation. Others found their consciousness expanding, breaking through the limitations of human perception. Midgardr did not rise like a traditional monster. It was a process of cosmic rebirth. The serpent-binding chains began to dissolve, their physical form becoming meaningless. They were replaced by something more fundamental, connections that went beyond metal, beyond physical limitation. Eric Wavebringer watched as the sea itself became a living entity. Waves were no longer simply water, moving but carriers of memories, of entire histories. Some warriors found themselves absorbed into these living currents, not dying, but becoming something else entirely. Eric Stormheart stood beside Gunnar, the spiritual advisor. The political divisions that had once seemed so important now appeared, laughably insignificant. They were witnessing something far greater than human conflict. "We are not being destroyed," Bjorn called out, his voice carrying beyond sound, beyond physical perception. "We are being reborn." The transformation defied every natural law. Creatures emerged that were part memory, part physical reality. Some were geological time made manifest, others were living embodiments of collective consciousness. Astrid fought with a precision that was both tactical and spiritual. Her movements were not about defeating an enemy, but about participating in a larger process of change. Each action was a negotiation with the fundamental fabric of reality. Midgardr was not a single entity, but a process of cosmic renewal. It dissolved boundaries between individual and collective, between physical and spiritual, between what was and what could be. Warriors experienced memories that were not their own, geological epochs, ancestral experiences, cosmic movements that spanned millennia. The boundary between self and universe began to dissolve. The serpent-binding chains had become something else, conduits of transformation, bridges between different states of existence. Gunnar understood first. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. Bjorn's transformed perception saw the larger pattern. Midgardr was a living process of cosmic reset, a fundamental reshaping of existence that went beyond human understanding. "We are becoming," he called out. Reality folded and unfolded. Possibilities became tangible. The world was being rewritten with each collective breath, and nothing would ever be the same again. The restoration runestone sat at the center of their new gathering place, a testament to survival, to transformation, to becoming. Its surface was alive with possibilities, with the intricate network of potential futures that stretched before them like an endless horizon. Silence held a different meaning now. Bjorn's transformed perception saw the world as it truly was, a living, breathing entity of infinite complexity. What had once been a landscape of separate territories was now a unified breathing organism. The clans that had fought for generations now understood their fundamental interconnectedness. Astrid moved among the survivors, her warrior's spirit now tempered by a deeper understanding. They were not the same people who had first faced Midgardr. Each individual carried memories that were not entirely their own. Geological epochs, ancestral experiences, cosmic movements that defied human comprehension. "We are not rebuilding," she told the gathered survivors. "We are becoming." The transformation had been complete. Some individuals were no longer entirely human in the way they had been before. Some had merged with the living memories of the sea. Others carried within them the consciousness of entire landscapes. The boundary between individual and collective had dissolved. Eric Wavebringer discovered that leadership now meant something entirely different. No longer about control, but about facilitating transformation. The political structures that had defined their previous existence seemed like relics of a distant, almost incomprehensible past. Eirik Stormheart, who had once been consumed by personal ambition, now worked tirelessly to help his people understand their new reality. His previous concerns seemed meaningless in the face of what they had experienced. The Restoration runestone pulsed with an inner light, not a static artifact, but a living document of their potential futures. Each mark told a story of adaptation, of renewal, of the incredible journey they had undertaken. Gunnar, the spiritual advisor, began to help people understand their new state of being. "We are not who we were," he explained. "We are something more." Children born in the aftermath were different. They saw the world with eyes that understood the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. Boundaries between species, between living and non-living, had become fluid concepts. The landscape itself had changed. Mountains breathed, coastlines moved with a living intelligence. The sea was no longer a separate entity, but a part of a larger, more complex organism. Bjorn stood as a bridge between what had been and what was becoming. His transformed perception allowed him to see the larger patterns, the cosmic dance of renewal that they had participated in. "We are creators now," he told them, "not just of our own existence, but of potential futures." Survival was no longer about individual preservation. It was about collective transformation. The clans that had once been separate now moved as a single complex organism. Their understanding of community had been fundamentally reshaped. The Restoration runestone continued to change. Lines would appear and disappear. Potential futures would emerge and dissolve. It was a living document of their becoming. Astrid worked to help people understand their new capabilities. Some could communicate without words, others could sense. The memories of the landscape, the very concept of individual identity, had been transformed. Eirik began to develop new ways of organizing their society, not based on old territorial boundaries, but on a more fluid understanding of collective needs. Leadership became about facilitating transformation, about helping people understand their new potential. The Restoration runestone was more than a marker of their survival. It was a beacon of hope, of infinite possibility. "We are not who we were," Bjorn repeated. "We are becoming." And in that becoming lay their greatest hope, their greatest potential, their future. The eternal memory scroll unfurled, its surface a living testament to their extraordinary journey, not a static document, but a breathing narrative that continued to write itself, capturing the transformation that had reshaped everything they knew about existence. Bjorn sat at the edge of a landscape that was no longer recognizable as the world they had once known. His transformed perception saw beyond physical boundaries, understanding the intricate web of connections that now defined their reality. "We were witnesses," he said, quietly, his voice carrying the weight of generations, to a moment of cosmic renewal. Astrid approached, no longer just a warrior, but something more. A bridge between what had been and what was becoming. The clans that had once fought each other now moved as a single complex organism. Their understanding of community, of existence itself, had been fundamentally reshaped. The eternal memory scroll captured more than just their physical journey. It held the collective memories of a people transformed, geological epochs intertwined, with personal experiences. The boundaries between individual and collective had dissolved into something far more profound. Eirik Stormheart, who had once been consumed by personal ambition, now understood the true meaning of unity. The political divisions that had once seemed so important now appeared as distant memories from another existence entirely. Eirik Wavebringer reflected on their transformation. Leadership was no longer about control, but about facilitating collective becoming. Their society had evolved beyond the simple concepts of territory and individual survival. Gunnar, the spiritual advisor, approached the eternal memory scroll. "We are not an ending," he said, tracing its surface. "We are a beginning, The landscape around them continued to breathe. Mountains that moved with living intelligence, seas that carried memories. Older than human civilization, children born in the aftermath saw the world with eyes that understood the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. Bjorn's perception allowed him to see the larger patterns, the cosmic dance of renewal they had participated in. Midgardr had not been a destroyer, but a process of fundamental transformation. "We became more than we were," he told those gathered. "We became something we could not have imagined." The eternal memory scroll continued to write itself. Each moment added new layers of understanding, new possibilities of existence. It was a living document of their journey, not just a record of what had happened, but a beacon of what could be. Astrid looked out over the transformed landscape. Boundaries between sea, land, and sky had become fluid constructs. Some of their people had merged with living memories of the earth. Others carried within them the consciousness of entire landscapes. "We are creators now," Bjorn said, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of cosmic understanding. The scroll captured moments of profound beauty. The first children born after the transformation, beings who understood connection in ways previous generations could not comprehend. Communities that moved and breathed as living organisms, a society that had transcended its previous limitations. Eric began to speak of their future, not as a series of plans, but as a living, breathing possibility. Their society now understood that survival was not about individual preservation, but about collective transformation. Eric reflected on their journey. The petty conflicts that had once divided them seemed like distant memories from another lifetime entirely. The eternal memory scroll pulsed with an inner light, a beacon of hope, of infinite potential. "We are not an ending," Gunnar repeated. "We are a beginning." Bjorn looked out over the transformed world. Midgardr had not destroyed them. It had awakened them to something far greater than they could have ever imagined, and their journey was just beginning.